The young Yurgan soldier's pulse quickened as he saluted his superior officer, a gesture meant to honor and respect. To his shock, the officer lunged at him, tackling him to the ground. "Are you insane?" the officer hissed, eyes darting around as the surrounding troops scattered for cover. He counted under his breath for 6 seconds before his tense posture relaxed. "I think we're fine, but in the future, no salutes." "What? Why?" the young soldier blurted out, still grappling with the sudden assault. It was his first deployment, and he hadn't yet learned not to question orders. The briefings had painted a rosy picture of their campaign, claiming that half the planet was already under Yurgan technocracy control, with the other half teetering on the brink of surrender. It was supposed to be a walk in the park, practically a paid vacation. "Human snipers," the officer growled, rising to his feet and brushing the dirt from his orange and black striped fur. "I should be back home enjoying my downtime, but instead, I'm stuck here dodging bullets from apes who are too cowardly to meet us in real combat." The Yurgan were descendants of a tiger-like creature that had evolved on a semi-tropical death world. Their expansion into space and subsequent colonization of the other planets in their system had gone unopposed. Minor skirmishes with other species had been easily won, thanks to the Yurgan's superior technology and military might. But everything changed when they encountered humans. The humans, for reasons unclear, were fiercely protective of the Ginter, a peaceful, herbivorous species. The Ginter lived simple lives, tending to their pastoral world, which held no strategic or material value. Yet, as soon as the conflict threatened Ginter territories, humans issued a stern warning: any aggression towards the Ginter would be met with lethal force. The Yurgan had laughed at first. Who were these strange primates to threaten them? The main human fleet was on the other side of the galaxy, and the few ships they had in the system were pitifully outnumbered. But as the war began in earnest, it became apparent that the humans would make the Yurgan pay dearly for every step into Ginter territory. When the Yurgan lost patience with the slow pace of their campaign, they deployed their greatest weapon, the technophage. This semi-sentient swarm of nanomachines targeted any foreign technology with an energized circuit, reducing it to scrap and leaving any biological beings in proximity shredded. It was the perfect weapon, or so the Yurgan believed. But the humans found ways to evade it. The technophage could detect and destroy a single low-powered LED buried beneath tons of rock. Yet somehow, the humans continued to bring non-Yurgan tech into the warzone undetected. Sniper fire from both humans and Ginter rained down on Yurgan troops, demoralizing them and racking up an impressive kill count. Officers warned their soldiers not to salute outdoors and to never stand still for more than 6 seconds. An officer who lingered too long would quickly find a fist-sized hole where their heart used to be. What had begun as a sweet victory against an outmatched opponent had degenerated into a bloody slog. Somehow, the humans were still managing to get reinforcements into the warzone, and their attacks were becoming more frequent and devastating. The young soldier's thoughts were interrupted by his officer's sudden halt as they approached the door to his office. A sharp sound like a rock hitting the door echoed, and a neat thumb-sized hole appeared at chest height. The officer looked down at the spreading red stain on his uniform where the bullet had passed through before lodging itself into the door. Mercifully, it didn't hurt. His knees buckled, and he collapsed to the ground, gasping out his final words, "Fucking humans. Bastards don't fight, fair." "Good hit, demon," the Ginter named Simsh remarked coldly, observing through his antique spotting scope from a hill 3 kilometers away from the Yurgan base. The antelope-like herbivore scanned the area for new targets. "There's an air transport with its rear hatch open. Looks like munitions inside, maybe medical supplies. It's hard to tell." The human sniper grunted, working the bolt on his rifle and chambering a high-explosive round. "Shooter ready," he said, settling back in behind the nearly 2-meter-long rifle. "Spotter ready," Simsh replied. "Wind direction is the same as before, 10 kilometers per hour and holding steady. 3 mils should do it." 3 mils of windage, confirmed, the human said, adjusting his aim and squeezing the trigger slowly. The integrated suppressor mitigated the rifle's blast, but it still made a supersonic crack as the bullet broke the sound barrier. By the time it reached its target, it would be subsonic, too slow to trigger the Yurgon transport's shielding or the base's automatic defenses. 6 seconds later, a flash of light was followed by a chain of explosions as the munitions detonated, destroying the other transports in sympathetic blasts. "Good hit, Demon," Scifi said. "New target, a window just opened in the main building. Looks like the base commander is peeking out to see what's going on. He's shouting orders." The human worked the bolt on his rifle and took aim. "Shooter ready," he said. "Spotter ready," replied Scifi. "Same wind call as before." 3 mils. 3 mils, confirmed, the human said, settling the crosshairs on the Yurgon commander. He pulled the trigger, felt the recoil, and watched the shimmering haze as the heavy bullet traced through the air. "Tiger, tiger, burning bright, Indiana, the forests of the night," he whispered, willing the bullet to connect with the Yurgon commander. There was a splash of gore as the feline alien was decapitated by the 12.7 by 99 mm round. "Good hit, Demon," Scifi said. New target. In orbit, the human Special Forces Group Nomad Fleet Recon prepared to drop into the occupied territory below. The local caretaking force had done an excellent job of slowing down the Yurgon, but now it was time for the professionals to go to work. The technophage had been a surprise, but it only targeted electronics. Fortunately, humans had been fighting wars long before electricity and were more than happy to reach into their bag of tricks. Tricks like the Macmillan TAC-50 sniper rifle and the optical rangefinder. Team leader Pineda looked at his troops with pride. "What falls from the sky?" he bellowed. "Trouble," shouted the troops in unison. Pineda smiled proudly. This was going to be fun. The Yurgon were about to learn about the ultra-halo jump and the orbital glider. The humans had adapted quickly, using low-tech solutions to bypass the technophage. They had returned to old tactics, relying on human ingenuity and grit to win the day. The human forces launched a series of coordinated strikes against the Yurgon. Supply lines were severed, communication hubs were destroyed, and Yurgon forces were left scrambling to respond. The humans moved with precision and efficiency, their guerrilla tactics proving devastatingly effective. The Yurgon, caught off guard by the ferocity and speed of the human attacks, struggled to regroup. Their once confident soldiers were now demoralized and exhausted, their morale steadily eroding with each setback. In a hidden bunker deep within Yurgon territory, Colonel Vecra pored over maps and reports, her mind racing as she tried to come up with a plan. The humans were relentless, and it seemed like every move the Yurgon made was met with a counterattack. She needed to find a way to turn the tide. Suddenly, an idea struck her. She called in her most trusted officers and outlined her plan. "We're going to launch a surprise attack on their main base. We'll use their own tactics against them, hit them hard, hit them fast, and leave them reeling." Her officers nodded, their faces set with determination. They knew the risks, but they also knew that this might be their best chance to turn the tide of the war. As they prepared for the attack, Vecra couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. The humans had been a formidable opponent, but they were not invincible. She was determined to show them that the Yurgon were not to be underestimated. The night was dark and moonless as the Yurgon strike force moved into position. They had used every trick in their arsenal to avoid detection, and now they were ready to launch their assault. Vecra signaled her troops, and they moved out, their movements swift and silent. The human base was well defended, but the Yurgon were prepared. They struck with precision, their weapons cutting through the human defenses like a knife through butter. Explosions rocked the base as Yurgon soldiers stormed through, their advance relentless. For a moment, it seemed like the Yurgon might succeed. The human defenders were caught off guard, their lines breaking under the onslaught. But then, the tide began to turn. Human reinforcements arrived, their counterattack fierce and determined. Vecra fought with everything she had, but she could see the writing on the wall. The humans were too well prepared, their resolve unshakable. As the battle raged on, she knew that they had underestimated their enemy once again. With a heavy heart, she ordered a retreat. The Yurgon soldiers fell back, their once confident advance now a desperate flight. Vecra knew that they had lost this battle, but she was not ready to give up. There had to be a way to defeat the humans. As she regrouped with her remaining forces, she vowed to find a way to turn the tide. The war was far from over, and she was determined to see the Yurgon emerge victorious. The humans had proven to be a formidable opponent, but they had not seen the last of the Yurgon. The battle for the Ginter world would continue, each side vying for control, each determined to outlast the other. The humans had shown that they were not to be underestimated, but the Yurgon were not ready to back down. The fight for the Ginter world was far from over, and both sides knew that only one would emerge victorious. As the Yurgon forces regrouped, Colonel Vecra began to consider new strategies. She knew that they needed to adapt if they were going to stand a chance against the humans. The old ways of warfare were proving ineffective, and it was time to think outside the box. She called a meeting with her top advisors and strategists, determined to find a new approach. "We need to change our tactics," she said, her voice firm. "The humans are using guerrilla warfare against us, and it's working. We need to find a way to counter their tactics and turn the tables on them." One of her advisors, a seasoned strategist named Yarrick, spoke up. "We need to use their own tactics against them," he suggested. "We need to be unpredictable, hit them where they least expect it, and use the environment to our advantage." Vecra nodded thoughtfully. "Agreed. We need to be more flexible, more adaptive. We can't afford to be predictable. Let's start by studying their tactics, learning from their successes, and finding ways to counter them." Over the next few weeks, the Yurgon forces began to implement their new strategy. They set up ambushes, launched surprise attacks, and used the terrain to their advantage. They adapted quickly, learning from their mistakes and refining their tactics with each engagement. The humans, meanwhile, continued to press their advantage. They knew that the Yurgon were adapting, but they were determined to stay one step ahead. They launched a series of coordinated attacks, targeting key Yurgon installations and supply lines. The fighting was fierce, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. The humans' guerrilla tactics continued to take a toll on the Yurgon, but the Yurgon were proving to be more resilient than expected. They fought back with renewed vigor, determined to hold their ground. In the midst of the chaos, a new player entered the fray. The Ginter, who had until now remained passive observers, decided that they could no longer stand by and watch their world be torn apart. They had always been a peaceful species, but the war had changed them. The Ginter began to organize, forming their own resistance movement. They used their knowledge of the land to their advantage, setting traps and ambushes for both the Yurgon and the humans. They were determined to protect their home, no matter the cost. The arrival of the Ginter resistance added a new layer of complexity to the conflict. Both the Yurgon and the humans found themselves facing a new enemy, one that was intimately familiar with the terrain and fiercely determined to defend their home. The Ginter's involvement forced both sides to reconsider their strategies. The humans, who had been fighting to protect the Ginter, now found themselves in the difficult position of having to navigate a three-way conflict. The Yurgon, meanwhile, had to contend with a new, highly motivated adversary. Colonel Vecra watched the unfolding events with a mixture of frustration and admiration. The Ginter were proving to be a formidable opponent, and their knowledge of the terrain gave them a significant advantage. She knew that the Yurgon needed to find a way to neutralize this new threat if they were going to stand a chance of winning the war. She called another meeting with her advisors, determined to find a solution. "The Ginter are proving to be a significant challenge," she said. "We need to find a way to deal with them, and quickly. Any ideas?" Yarrick, who had been studying the Ginter's tactics, spoke up. "We need to find a way to disrupt their operations. They're using their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage, but if we can find a way to level the playing field, we might be able to neutralize their threat. Vecra nodded. Agreed. We need to gather as much intelligence as possible on their operations and find a way to counter their tactics. We can't afford to let them continue to disrupt our efforts. Over the next few weeks, the Yurgon forces focused on gathering intelligence on the Ginter resistance. They used drones, scouts, and informants to learn as much as they could about the Ginter's operations and movements. It was a slow and painstaking process, but they knew that it was essential if they were going to stand a chance of defeating this new adversary. Meanwhile, the humans continued their own efforts to support the Ginter and disrupt the Yurgon. They launched a series of coordinated attacks on Yurgon supply lines and installations, using their superior mobility and guerrilla tactics to their advantage. The fighting was intense, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. As the conflict dragged on, it became clear that the war was far from over. The Yurgon, humans, and Ginter were all determined to emerge victorious, and none of them were willing to back down. The battle for the Ginter world had become a brutal, three-way conflict, with each side vying for control. Colonel Vecra knew that the Yurgon needed a decisive victory if they were going to turn the tide of the war. She called another meeting with her advisors, determined to come up with a plan that would give them the upper hand. We need to find a way to deliver a crippling blow to the humans and the Ginter, she said. We need to hit them hard and fast, and leave them reeling. Any ideas? Yarrick, who had been working on a new strategy, spoke up. We could launch a coordinated attack on their main base. If we can take out their command center and disrupt their operations, it might give us the advantage we need. Vecra nodded. It's a risky move, but it might be our best shot. Let's start planning the operation and gather the necessary resources. We need to make sure that everything is in place before we launch the attack. Over the next few weeks, the Yurgon forces meticulously planned their assault. They gathered intelligence, coordinated their movements, and prepared their troops for the upcoming battle. They knew that the operation would be risky, but they were determined to see it through. On the night of the attack, the Yurgon forces moved into position. They struck with precision and speed, their movements swift and coordinated. The initial assault caught the humans and the Ginter off guard, and for a moment, it seemed like the Yurgon might succeed. But the humans and the Ginter were quick to respond. They rallied their forces and launched a counterattack, determined to defend their base. The fighting was fierce and chaotic, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. In the midst of the battle, Colonel Vecra fought with everything she had. She knew that this was their best chance to turn the tide of the war, and she was determined to see it through. But as the battle raged on, it became clear that the Yurgon were outmatched. The humans and the Ginter fought with a tenacity and determination that the Yurgon had underestimated. Despite their best efforts, the Yurgon were forced to retreat, their once confident advance now a desperate flight. As Vecra regrouped with her remaining forces, she knew that they had lost this battle. But she was not ready to give up. She vowed to find a way to turn the tide, determined to see the Yurgon emerge victorious. The war for the Ginter world would continue, each side vying for control, each determined to outlast the other. The humans and the Ginter had shown that they were not to be underestimated, but the Yurgon were not ready to back down. The fight for the Ginter world was far from over, and both sides knew that only one would emerge victorious.